أيوة الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. يا ربنا زدنا علما وتقوى واغفر لنا ذنوبنا لقد ظلمنا أنفسنا ولا غافر لي ذنوبي إلا أنت، فنتوجه إليك ونستغفر الله ونستغفرك ونتوب إليك. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. أما بعد. So we begin this session, inshallah, in which we have entered into Al Bab al Awwal of the book Mirat al Tullab. Al Bab al Awwal, or the first gate or pathway of knowledge. The idea of Al Bab, the concept of Al Bab, the gateway or the pathway, but it's really more so the gateway, is the way I should be more specific in saying that it's a word that's utilized in the way that scholars compile their books. So the book is called El Kitab. And then a chapter is called El Bab. And then the subsection is called Fasl. There's different ways of organizing, but I always have been impressed with the imagery that's conjured up with the way that the scholars of Islam have labeled the different parts of their text. They label them according to a certain organization. And there's a philosophy behind that organization. So, for instance, when we use the term El Bab, it basically is the doorway. So, you get this idea that in order to get a grasp of knowledge, you have to enter into the doorway. And so, what you get an understanding of is that a subject area of knowledge, in order for you to be able to grasp a subject area, you have to take certain steps that will give you the ability to begin to grasp that subject area, that body of knowledge. So when they use the term El Bab, the idea is that in order for you to go into the room of knowledge, you have to enter by way of its door or gateway. Then you begin to become familiar with what's in that space. And when you become familiar with in that space, now there's another logic that comes in. Like in this section, it says El Bab al Awwal. This is the first gateway. Then another gateway is open to you, and another gateway is open to you. As you go through the different gateways of knowledge, you build the foundation that allows you to enter into another gateway. And then when you set your foundation after you've been through all those paths of knowledge, now you're ready to elevate to another level. That's why that imagery is important, because a lot of times we it's important because it gives us this sense of how to grow in knowledge. It gives us this sense that there's a ladder of ascent, right? There's a ladder of traveling on the way of knowledge. And so we get this understanding that seeking knowledge has rules to it, it has etiquettes to it, it has procedures. It's not just a matter of opening a book and then thinking that you know, but there's guidance that's to be pursued along the way. There's guidance that's to be pursued along the way. And so there's a number of keywords uh, that we confront in this section. There's a number of keywords that we confront in this section, but we don't want to. Today, we're going to just introduce some ideas and then we'll come back with a little more depth the next time, the next session. We're going to break this chapter up or this section of knowledge into a couple of sessions or so because it is such an important topic. الباب الأول في أركان الإيمان. So the first gateway to knowledge is dealing with the strongholds or the cornerstones of Iman. We usually say pillars, right? The cornerstones of Iman. And so Sheikh Uthman then Fodi, rahmatullahi alayhi, keeping in sync with the purpose of this book, which is to introduce to the student of knowledge what is foundational to know from the knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah as a basis within each of the 50 lessons that he teaches. And what he calls foundational and a basis is to be familiar with what's sufficient to know for each of the 50 lessons, with what's sufficient to know with regard to the knowledge of the Quran and the Sunnah and the statements of the scholars that will provide a person with grounding, that will provide a person with grounding. That's extremely important because here what Sheikh Uthman Danfodi is doing is he's orienting the student to enough knowledge from the Quran and the Sunnah for every lesson that he's teaching so that it serves as a starting point for a person to grow in their understanding. Now, in this section, when he talks about Iman or the cornerstones of Iman, he's referring to Quran and he's referring to the Sunnah and he's referring to the way that certain concepts are understood by some of the scholars. Now between he's combining between the knowledge of Quran and Sunnah and a certain tendency in Islamic tradition. Here he's focusing on combining knowledge of Quran and Sunnah and also keeping it simple with regard to ideas that are brought in from uh, ilm al-kalam or from a rational philosophical explanation of Iman. That's a specific type of orientation that's taken by some scholars to explain Islamic belief. They just don't solely depend on Quran and Sunnah, but they also employ or use certain rational arguments that are based at times in Quran and Sunnah, that are based on human experience, that are based on principles of reason, and that can even be based on uh, knowledge of the universe, and experience of spirituality. So our purpose here is to understand the text, is not to get into a criticism of approach, but it's to understand the approach. So today we will do an overview, cover some basic points, and then we'll regroup on Wednesday with a little more depth. He begins with saying, and may we benefit from the knowledge of the Sheikh in this world and the hereafter. May Allah forgive him and forgive us. He says, Sheikh Uthman then Fodio rahmatullahi alayhi, quoting from the Quran, قال الله تعالى ليس البر أن تولوا وجوهكم قبل المشرق والمغرب ولكن البر من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر والملائكة والكتاب والنبيين. And so here he's quoting from the Quran, and he's quoting an ayah that's focused on talking about what is the core of belief. What is the core of belief? And I'm so used to uh, saying this piece from Hadith Jibril. He quotes Hadith Jibril as well. Hadith Jibril uh, states, what is Iman? أن تؤمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله واليوم الآخر وتؤمن وتؤمن بالقدر خيره وشره. Here is very interesting because there's an overlap and alignment between the Quran and the Hadith that's chosen almost word for word. And so, in basic translation, uh, the Quran is stating that the pursuit of bir is a word that should be left as it is in Arabic without translating it. And then the meaning should be understood. So the word bir and the word taqwa, you find these two terms mentioned with regularity. Taqwa is another word which should not be translated. The meaning should be clarified because taqwa as a word is not going to find an equivalent in the English language, just as well as bir as a word is not going to find an equivalent in the Arabic language. So we should learn the word as it is. Bir is an Arabic term, it's a Quranic term. Taqwa is a Quranic term. Those terms should be left as they are and should be explained. I hope that is clear. So, bir is a concept that we find in the Quran that points to a state which is above taqwa. Taqwa, simply put, you can come at it from a few different ways. You can come at it from a linguistic way, and then you can come at it from how it's understood in Islamic scholarship, although it's a Quranic term. A word, people, in Islamic sciences can have a meaning in the language, the Arabic language, can have a meaning in the Quran and in the Sunnah, and can have a meaning with regard to how it is that the scholars use it. That's a principle that any serious student of knowledge should always carry with themselves. Intellectually, you have to get into that mode of understanding subtleties and nuances. The Arabic language existed before the revelation of the Quran. So the speakers, the Arabic speakers, They had a language that had its concepts and its ideas in the language. The Quran, when it's revealed in the Arabic language, but the Quran changes some of the meanings that were used by the Arabs. And we don't have time to get into the details of that, but we want to make sure that we have an understanding that the language of the Quran, the Quranic Arabic, is not always equivalent to what we find that was used prior to the revelation of Islam. That's why the scholars they they use this tripartite classification system that a word can have meaning as how it was used or how it's just used in the Arabic language, and then a word can have take on another dimension on top of how it's used in the language. The Quran gives it another meaning, so it adds another layer of meaning. On top of that, that same word that is utilized in the Arabic language is found in the Quran with another layer of meaning. Sometimes the scholars will give the word another meaning, maybe a little slightly different than what's found in the Quran and in the Sunnah. So then a word can have three layers of meaning. You have to be able to distinguish what's what. Some people say, oh, that's difficult, that's hard. That's how it is when you pursue the path of knowledge. It's serious. There's some commitment that we have to have intellectually to understand. In any event, the word bir, as is found in the Quran, and the word taqwa, as is found in the Quran, we're going to talk about it a little bit. Taqwa, as found in the Quran, is gives this sense of a person protecting themselves, taking the waqaya. You're taking the precaution and the protection by what? By doing or implementing the guidelines of the deen, the commands of the deen, what you're asked for in the deen at the basic fundamental level. So you can really say taqwa in one sense, you can give it the meaning that taqwa is to protect yourself by way of implementing the deen practically through action, as well as having what's foundational of belief, right? But the confusion here comes in that the Quran is using the term bir also for the issue of belief, and it will clarify that in a minute. Usually, in the English language, taqwa is translated as God consciousness, and that doesn't give the meaning 100% of implementing the deen. That could be something that you're just in your mind, being conscious of God. The meaning is not totally off because it's the end result of being a person that's implementing or practicing the deen, that you have God consciousness. But more literally, more closer to the text, is this idea of taking protection, right? You're gaining protection for yourself from the hellfire by implementing what it is that God commands, that Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala commands. Now that's foundational. Bir is to go beyond what's foundational, right? And it includes all kinds of good. It includes all kinds of good. So the idea of bir is that you're going beyond the basics. And that's why sometimes they call it righteousness, right? They say that the term bir is they translate to righteousness, but it's this idea of the pursuit of good, right? Of all types of good. And so the Quran here says, لَيْسَ الْبِرْ أَن تُوَلُّوا وُجُوهَكُمْ قِبْلَ الْمَشْرِقِ وَالْمَغْرِبِ. So the pursuit of good, people, It's not that you are facing the Qibla or you're putting yourself in the direction of the east or the west. لكن البر من آمن بالله واليوم الآخر وملائكته وكتبه والنبيين. But what bir is to believe, to have Iman, right? To have Iman. Iman is another term which we shouldn't translate. This idea of translating some terms, not translating other terms, is not my concept. I want to make sure that that's clear because I want to make because I have much respect and love for Dr. Ismail Farouqi. He passed away, rahmatullahi alayhi, some time ago, but he wrote about this in his book Towards Islamic English. And he determined that as a rule, there's some words that shouldn't be translated. They should be left as they are because they have their own power. So when we use the word believe and we use the word faith, those words are coming from other traditions. Amana is another term. We call it belief. But amana, it means belief in the past tense, so to speak. But the word belief is not enough to capture the meaning because amana in the Quran is to hold firm to something, right? To believe in it and gain protection, and gain protection and security, right? Especially the word security. And so the term belief and faith, those terms, they don't capture 100% what Iman is. And so there's the linguistic definition of what Iman is, right? There's the linguistic definition of what Iman is. And then there's uh, what Iman is demonstrated by what you should be doing. And we find the Quran sometimes defines Iman not in that linguistic way. The Quran tells you what Iman is by what you should be doing. We'll get to that in a minute. So, in the Arabic language in general, you find that the word Iman means tasdeeq. Tasdeeq today is grasping some Arabic words for some people. And so, tasdeeq is to verify something within your heart. Is to verify something within your heart. And they call it assent to, like you agree with that thing with no doubt, and you firmly are rooted in it. There's no doubt in it. That's one level. If it has doubt in it, then it hasn't reached the level of iman, so to speak. Right. So we when they say tasdiq al jazim الذي لا يقبل الشك والذي يحض على العمل, and that's something that's very important because sometimes we get into these debates about what iman means, uh, and we disagree with this linguistic definition at times, some scholars. But here it says that it's a belief. Sheikh Muhammad Diddu brings this up. It's a affirmation, I should say, that's solid, that doesn't admit of doubt. Like you're firm on it. You're not moved by anything else. You're grounded in that thing that you committed to believing in, right? And it's not only that you're grounded and you're convinced, not a blind conviction. It's a knowledge-based conviction. You're not doubtful, but that also that iman, that thing that you have affirmed that's true, it also pushes you to act. It also pushes you to act. And so that's where the ulama they differ in Islam. Because some just say that iman is that you confess with your tongue and you affirm with your heart. And that's kind of a standard belief. And then they say that some go a little further and they say, and you prove it with your actions. You prove it with acting upon it. In the Maliki orientation and in the Hanbali orientation, especially later the Hanbalis, you're going to find that that's the standard definition. The action is included in it. Everyone else, it doesn't mean that action is not important, but they keep it to kind of like a minimal. But here we find that it should push us to act. So that's why we say that an affirmation, a tasdeeq, that is not firm, we don't call it Iman. Not firm means that you're shaky about it. It means that you're insecure about it. It means that you're not clear, right? It means that you're ambiguous. Maybe, maybe not. You know, you have to be, there has to be a reality of firmness. And that's why uh, it's important to be grounded in the knowledge of the deen and work through the process of gaining certainty when it comes to the issue of Iman, right? When it comes to the issue of Iman. And so Sheikh Uthman then Fodio, he picks an ayah of the Quran in which it said it's not righteousness that you turn your faces to the east and the west, but true righteousness, that's how they translated bir, is that you believe in Allah, the hereafter, the angels, and the books that were descended, and the prophets. The idea of this ayah of the Quran is that in this ayah of the Quran, we get an understanding, and this is the 177th ayah of Surah Al-Baqarah, people. We get an understanding in this ayah about what is the objective of Iman. Here, when we talk about what bir is, what the pursuit of all goodness is belief in the unseen. The act of turning towards the east or turning towards the west in prayer, and this comes in the context of the qibla being changed. So the Quran is clarifying what is bir, because at this point in time, the Prophet ﷺ had changed the qibla from what it was, which used to be to Bayt al-Maqdis, in the direction of Masjid al-Aqsa. And that at that time, when the Qibla was in that direction, not facing the Kaaba, we had the same Qibla as the people of the book. And so some began to criticize the Prophet ﷺ in this regard, and they turned away from Iman, believing in his prophethood and in believing consequentially in the revelation of the Quran. Some made it an issue. They tried to make it like we say in Spanish, un delito, an error or mistake or some sort of deficiency on the part of the Prophet. It was, alayhi salatu wasalam, it was a test for the believers. And so here there's a differentiation that's made between action and the goal of the action. So the goal here is to be committed to the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, and more so to believe in Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala, right? To believe in the hereafter, the angels, the books, and the prophets. That's the goal of Iman. In this case, the actions of Iman, or the means, so to speak, they were changed. Like for one period of time, that was allowable, right? To face Bayt al-Maqdis in prayer. But the idea is not the direction here as an end in itself. The idea is to pray to Allah and to be obedient to Allah and to love Allah. And so the Quran comes and sets that foundation of what Iman is. And so, in many ways, Sheikh Uthman then Fodio Rahmatullahi alayhi, quoting this ayah, is teaching us like we have to differentiate between the objective of an action, and especially a spiritual dimension, and the action itself. The two go together, right? But we sometimes we get caught up in the formality of religion and we miss the end goal of the religion. Now the formality can be a guideline, but in this case, you know what I'm saying, like the people got stuck. The Prophet ﷺ is guiding the people to what they should be doing, then they fight against it. And so here the ayah is telling us that righteousness, right, el bir, to pursue all good, in other words, which is that's the better way of saying it to get used to the term bir, is to believe in Allah, to have Iman in Allah, in the last day, in the angels, and in the prophets. Believing in Allah, believing that we come to account, believing that the angels are sent with the books, and those books are given to the prophets. And because we are, the prophets are given books and they're given a message, the prophets inform us about who Allah is. We're accountable. We're accountable for our deeds in the world. And so then he quotes the hadith, Sheikh Uthman bin Fodio, he quotes the hadith of Umar. And the hadith of Umar here is the hadith of Jibreel, in which Jibreel asked the Prophet Muhammad والسلام, the Jibreel, who's an angel. He asked the Prophet, who's a prophet, Muhammad bin Abdullah, who's a prophet, والسلام, what is Iman? And so the response that Jibreel asked the question, then he responds himself, is to believe in Allah, the angels, the books, the messengers, the last day, and to believe in Qadr, its sweetness and its bitterness, or the good that may manifest, or the bad that may manifest. And then the scholars, he says, uh, they gave a definition. The majority of the scholars of the people of the Sunnah, that Iman is tasdeeq, and here was tasdeeq is affirmation of what's known to have been communicated by the Messenger of Allah to be necessary or to be foundational. And then he quotes Abdurrahman Suyuti, rahmatullahi alayhi, in his book Shar al-Kawakib. The Iman in the Arabic language is affirmation, but in the Sharia, in Quran Sunnah, is affirmation of the heart without doubt, we mentioned before, right? Is affirming all that's necessary that the messenger has brought without going into a lot of details, or without going into uh, areas in which people are investigating them, or people are researching them, and they're attempting to come at some sort of answer for those issues. Iman in this case is believing what's foundational, what's foundational, what's essential. There's side issues, and those side issues we may think about them, and they may be the consequence of reflection. The scholars reflect on things, right? We call that ijtihad. So he said that's not what's necessary to believe in. What's necessary to believe in is the what's foundational, what the prophets brought, and in this case, what the Prophet Muhammad brought. And for today, we'll stop there. So Iman is to believe in Allah, the last day, the angels, the books, and the prophets. Hadith Jibril adds to believe in Qadr, and we'll get into that. And we'll read this, the English translation here. Allah wa ta'ala says it is not righteousness, it's not bir that you turn your faces to the east and the west, but true bir is that you believe that you have Iman in Allah, the hereafter, the angels, the books that have been revealed, and the prophets. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, as is related in the Sahih of Imam Muslim, on the authority of Umar radiallahu anhu, when Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam was asked about true belief, when Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam asked the Prophet about true belief, it is that you believe in Allah, His angels, His books, His messengers, and the hereafter, and that you believe in the divine decree. Right. The majority of the scholars of the Sunnah, may Allah be pleased, and then they mentioned, the with the issue of Qadr, the divine decree, is bitterness and is sweetness. The majority of the scholars of the Sunnah, may Allah be pleased with them, have delineated the outlines of what is necessary to believe in. So Iman is defined as affirmation. Here he has it as acceptance, but it's better to say affirmation. Affirming something without doubt of what is foundational necessary. I mean, it doesn't require a lot of thinking. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't require a lot of thinking. It's pretty much clear cut. Then he follows that up by saying that Abdurrahman Sayyuti said in his commentary, Al-Kawakib, that true Iman linguistically, or as is understood in the Arabic language, it means tasdeeq, affirmation. While according to the Sharia, according to Iman, how it's understood in the book and the Sunnah, it means acceptance of the heart or affirmation of the heart without doubt, right? Of everything which is known clearly or foundationally that the messenger came with, right? And we're not obligated to go into the details of Iman and so on and so forth and Aqidah issues. It's not the obligation. What's foundational, what's the cornerstone of Iman is to have a grasp of what's necessary, what's key, what's the core, what's simple belief, in that regard of what Islam determines to be Iman. And with that, we end people. We ask Allah to guide our hearts and our tongues and our understanding. And we ask Allah wa ta'ala to facilitate for us the practice of this deen. And we beg Allah to die in the state of Islam. And we ask Allah not to leave this world without having accomplished as much as we can in the realm of birr, in the realm of doing all kinds of good. We ask for the acceptance of Allah, and we ask Allah wa ta'ala to increase us in knowledge and to grant us the supports necessary for implementation. We ask Allah to open the gates of risk for us, of all kinds of risk. And we ask Allah wa ta'ala for those who have passed away. We ask Allah to guide all of us. We ask for Allah to accept us. And we ask for those who are in the path of knowledge that Allah facilitate for them, and for the sick, and for our families. And we ask Allah wa ta'ala for strength and health and facility, and to be removed from the path of harm. And we send salawat on the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam without boundary. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.